Welcome to another edition of Up Close and Personal, a new segment of our media campaign to counter the American and Western narrative about all things Russian. My guest today is Deborah Armstrong. Deborah, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be included here and to be able to speak with you today.
Well, you are a friend of Russia, a friend of Crimea. I want to share your story with our viewers.
Okay.
You have been a lifelong television and print journalist. Tell me a little bit about your background and your career.
Okay. Well, to make it lifelong, I'm going to have to say my professional life, because I'm now 57 and I was a reporter in television, worked in television for about 15 years. And began my sorry, my cat wants to come and photobomb us all. This is Deanie. He says hello. I began in television really right after college, and I got a job as a writer and for a syndicated national television show. And then after that, I belonged to a church at that time, which I'm no longer affiliated with. But at that time, that was the opportunity I had to go to Russia. And I had been speaking Russian for a while. Like I'd already been like homeschooling myself. So like I had like a basic grasp of Russian, like beginning Russian, and not anywhere near like fluent, of course. But they chose me to go on this project, which we had in the Soviet Union. And that was quite an interesting thing, because we worked at Leningrad television it was at the time it was called the Len Teleradio Komitet, so the Committee for State Radio and Television. And we had a kind of a joint venture with them where our church gave them some equipment such as computers. I think they gave them a camera. And in exchange, we worked there as Soviet citizens and were paid in rubles. And at that time, the economy was quite bad. It was 1991. And so we lived on an average salary of $50 a month, that's what it worked out to in dollars at the time. And of course, that changed all the time because inflation was just all over the place. And I was only 25. So unfortunately, I didn't know then some of the things that I know now as to what was causing all of that to happen. The collapse, I guess, if you will. I don't like to really refer to it as the collapse of the Soviet Union, because I think that outside forces, it didn't just collapse on its own the way we've been told. But that's what we thought when we were there. And to be honest, a lot of the Russians even believed the same way. And they would say, "Where are you from?" And when I'd say I was from America, they would say, "U vas нет problem," like you don't have any problems there. And I would say, "Нет, у нас есть проблемы." We do have problems, but I didn't know. They didn't want to hear it because it was so bad at the time in Russia that no one really wanted to hear that anything could be wrong with the U.S. And boy, if we'd only known then what we know now, right? But after I got back from the Soviet Union, I spent just over a year and a half there. And when I came back, I wanted to continue working in television. That wasn't easy because it's never easy to say that you lived in the Soviet Union or Russia, because some people just don't react well to that. And it's always been that way. That's why I'm very aware of the Russophobia. Now it's like just unprecedented levels. But even back then, when we were supposedly allies with Russia, there was still a lot of Russophobia. And when I got back from there, people asked me if I was a communist, which was pretty funny because I just lived through a coup in the Soviet Union where literally the communists had tried to take control again, and the people didn't let them do it. Yeltsin didn't allow it. And we can look back on that probably with a different view today as to what was really going on behind the scenes. But it was pretty funny to come back to the States and be called a communist when communism had already fallen there. And the funny thing is, I'll still hear people saying that today. they'll refer to Russia as the Soviet Union or say that they're commies over there. And I don't understand. Are their watches stuck in 1984? I don't know. But they're definitely in the wrong century, because this is already, 31 years ago. So when I got back from the Soviet Union, I went to work into television, and that was a difficult transition, because to just go straight into working in news at a national level, I'd been working at the national level previously, and I was working at the national level in Russia. But when I got back to the States, I was, my resume wasn't what it needed to be, apparently. So I had to start all over again from scratch. And so I worked in local news, and I carried around my own camera in the small markets, like 50 pounds worth of gear. I would carry, they had these Ikegami cameras back then that weighed like 50 pounds. And then you would have your light belt, and you would have your tripod, and you would have your sound thing, because these cameras didn't have their own sound equipment. So you had to carry a pack for your sound. And there I was like tiny. I was like 100 pounds, 105 pounds when I got back from Russia. I wish I was that small now, but when I got right back from there, there I was running around 50 pounds of gear and being paid basically minimum wage to do that. And I don't think people understand that, but in local television news, the only people that really make any money to speak of are the anchors. And the reporters, they do most of the work. The anchors that I knew, some of them would just sit around reading, doing crossword puzzles. Or they'd get their 4-hour lunch breaks, go put on their makeup, which was paid for by the station too. But not for the reporters. We did all the work, and we didn't get paid much. But that's okay, because I loved what I did back then. And I had so many wonderful stories that I got to cover. Just everything you can imagine, I covered it. I covered crime. My favorite, of course, was always the human interest, but I do like covering just anything. It was breaking news. It was crime. I'd cover train wrecks. I covered auto pileups. I covered shootings. I covered stabbings. The funniest story I think I ever covered was an actual sighting of the Virgin Mary, which this took place when I was working in a small market, and there was a very large Hispanic population in that market. And there was a road sign which had a rainbow pattern on the back of it, which the people that made the road sign said it was from the oil that is on the road signs when they manufacture them, and that's what was causing it. But about 10,000 people showed up, and they begged to differ. They said it was the Virgin Mary. And I broke that story because no one believed me. I tried telling them there's this sighting of the Virgin Mary going on, and they're like, right, sure there is. So I went down there and I covered it, and I had this story all ready to go, and I contacted my producer, and she says she wouldn't believe me. I said, can I just send it into CNN? And she goes, yeah, right, whatever, sure. And so I sent it to CNN. And the news director, who happened to be out of town, he was actually on a cruise in Fiji. Somehow this showed up, my story showed up on his cruise in Fiji, and he needed a beer after that. But it was quite something. I mean, 10,000 people converged on this town, and they were all lined up, and I mean, they had their rosaries and they had candles, and they were praying and crying, and it was really something to behold. And of course, after it broke, then everybody and their dog showed up, and it was a media circus. But that was just one of many stories. It got a little bit more.
So let me ask you this, because I'm very curious. You spent a year and a half in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And you're working in television, but I'm more interested in what were your impressions of the Soviet people, the Soviet culture, the Soviet politics. This would be of real interest to me, and I think a lot of people. What did you take away from this?
Сегодня в музыкальной части игры «Найди меня» две премьеры. Это песни, и обе они написаны композитором Игорем Азаровым.
Falling in the rain. forget your life. Out on the street, I see all the people holding umbrellas, running, hoping to get dry.
You know, what I got the most from Russia was just how kind the people were. And the Soviet people in particular, as opposed to like maybe the general modern Russians today, there was a different mentality. There was a lot of humility. And people from the West would say that they were repressed, but I didn't find them to be repressed because they were all quite vocal about their, criticism of their government at that time. I mean, perestroika and glasnost was a very open time, and the journalists were real serious about telling the truth because they were no longer being censored as they had been in previous times, supposedly. I'm not sure how all that is either, but there was some censorship for sure. But I don't think anything like the scale we have in the US right now. But it just the kindness of these people. I mean, they were so kind and so generous, and they'd invite you into their home, and they would make a big dinner, and they would spend, more money than they should have spent on it, like maybe a month's salary. And it was really quite humbling to experience that, because I came from the United States, and our economy at the time, at least, was a lot better than it is now. It was certainly better than the Soviet Union's economy was at that time. And the people were just amazing. I mean, they were just very kind, and they had a type of humility. And like, I worked with a lot of people that were known names in Russian media at the time, in Soviet media. And they didn't have like a big celebrity attitude about it, like you would run into in the United States, where there's all this self-importance and you can't touch them. You can't even look at them. Don't look at them, because they're gods walking among us or something. I don't know. But that attitude was completely missing in the Soviet Union. And you could bump into somebody who was a celebrity on the street, and they'd just say hi, and you'd say hi. And I still find that among a lot of Russian celebrities today. That same kind of, they're more reachable, or what's the right word? It's easier to connect with people, I think, in Russia than in the United States. Like here, we have a more tiered type of system, is how it feels to me, where if you're not, so-and-so, or you don't know so-and-so, or you don't have X number of viewers, then, they don't want nothing to do with you. But in the Soviet Union, there was just more of that. The idea that all people were equal was very strong in the Soviet Union. It was what they believed. And so the people had just this wonderful humility and kindness. That's what the real take home was. Lots of funny stories of hanging out with Russians and doing different things and working on a dating game TV show.
So what kind of work have you been doing of late? You're not in television anymore.
Mm-mm.
Are you working as an independent? Are you working as an internet blogger? What are you doing these days?
Well, for a long time, I got out of news. I got out of journalism because my last experiences in the business were difficult. And, I think every business has its toxic environments, but it was different. And I don't know if it's the industry, or every industry is like this right now, or what it is. I used to think it was just TV, but the more I hear from other people, I think that there's a lot of widespread narcissism, to use that word. It's kind of a buzzword now, but I mean, there's just a lot of very toxic work environments. And my last experience was like that. It was toxic from the environmental standpoint, from just the place where I was working, as well as I think ethically. And it did a real strong number on me. So I got out of writing for a long time. I taught English. I even taught beginning Russian for a while, just beginning Russian, because my Russian's only intermediate level. And I've lost quite a lot of it due to being lazy and relying on DeepL Translate. But I finally, it was a long learning curve for me too, because after I got out of TV news is when I really started, I think, to become aware of a lot more than I had known as a journalist working for, mainstream, for network TV. And, just doing my own research, turning off the TV and reading what some people were actually saying who'd been going to these places like Syria and Gaza and now Donbass. And when the special military operation began, that was around the time I started writing again, was after that. I just felt, I've been studying this, and all I really do is talk about it on Facebook. I mean, I'm a journalist. I should be able to write about this. Maybe I can contribute my voice in some way and help to spread the truth, because I really think people need to know what's going on over there, and they're not hearing it. And so I just want to be able to lend my voice to whatever extent that I can, to be able to continue telling the truth. And it's the time that I'm going to spend researching something, anything to learn about it, anyway, to learn about it, I may as well write about it. And that's what got me back into writing.
So, as you know all too well, the American public, and I'm not sure really how to describe them, but they've been brainwashed for sure since the cradle. But what I have a hard time understanding is the apathy, the willful ignorance of really intelligent people. How would you describe the majority of the American people today vis-a-vis what their country is doing right now in Ukraine against Russia? Blue and gold flags on people's porches, approving of this Nazi element that is obvious in Ukraine to so many of us. But how would you describe the American public, and why would you say that it's so easy to get, it's so difficult to get through to them?
I think about this a lot, and it is frustrating, because I've had people call me a Russian propagandist, and it's pretty funny because I'm really not being paid right now at all. I mean, I'm just writing freelance, and I'm not being paid, but I'm especially not by the Kremlin or by anyone, but I'm just trying to get the truth out there. But I would say that mostly people are just not interested. It isn't that they even disagree strongly. Some do, and I get very vociferous hate mail from people that disagree with what I'm writing about. But I also just have a hard time getting people to even listen. Like, just friends that I have or people that I know, when I try to talk about this, they're not interested. And honestly, I don't know if it's just because of the brainwashing, or if it's a mixture of that and how hard a lot of people are working just to stay afloat right now. Because I'm not talking about people that are well off, like academics. Academics are a whole other level of propaganda, because they're so well educated that they don't think they need to know anything, and so you can't really get through to them at all. But some of the people that aren't maybe as learned in our institutions, more of the working class people, they're just really busy. I mean, they're working 3 jobs, some of them, just to stay afloat, keep their families fed, pay the mortgages and the rent, which the rent is just skyrocketing everywhere. My own mother-in-law, they increased the rent on her $800 per month after she'd been living in an apartment for 25 years, I want to say. And they just suddenly increased it by $800. So she had to move out. And that's just one story out of many. And it's crazy right now in the United States. So I don't know if the apathy is due to people are just too stressed out and they don't care about anything other than just what they need to do to get through the day. And this is just something that has nothing to do with them. Or maybe it's also because we're just so used to being at war that it's nothing anymore. And I don't know. I mean, I was lucky to grow up and live during a few times when the US wasn't at war, like the few years of the Carter administration, basically. I think that's all it was during my lifetime. But we've been at war pretty much all of my life, except for that. And all of the people's lives, the younger people today, they've been living in a nation at war. So I don't know if maybe they're just so used to it and so calloused that they just don't care, or what it is. But it is very hard to get awareness on this topic because of that.
All right. So kind of wrap this up. You became a friend of Russia and a friend of Crimea. Tell me why. Why did you decide to become part of our organization?
Well, you invited me, but also because I admire what you're trying to do. I just want to help in any way I can to get the truth out there in whatever way I can assist with that. And if writing is a way to do it, I hope I can. I can do a lot of research and present. Like I did a in-depth article about Bandera and about Roman Shukhevich, who was like Bandera. These are Nazis that Nazi collaborators that actually collaborated with the Wehrmacht in World War II, and they're basically being worshipped in Ukraine right now, as I'm sure you know. You know, they've got these statues of them everywhere, and they're on their postage stamps, and they were Nazi collaborators, and Bandera was responsible for 100,000 deaths in Lvov, you know, during World War II. So I research and I write about things like that to try to get the truth out there. I wrote about the indoctrination of Ukrainian children from Plost on. They have all these camps now that they send the kids to, and they're paid for by the state. So, you know, what parent is going to say no to that? They're going to send their kids. And they had 4-year-old kids learning how to fire automatic weapons. And little kids, I see videos all the time of little Ukrainian kids, toddlers, little girls, little boys, you know, 3-4 years old, saying, kill the Russians, and waving knives in the air, because they're being psychologically abused. They're being raised from the crib to think this way, you know, that the Russians are just Moscows, as they like to call them, and that they don't even view them as human. That fascist ideology, it's a terrible thing. As Scott Ritter refers to it as an odious ideology. And you know, I don't think there's any word that really describes how awful it truly is. I think odious is probably as good as we're going to get. It is a horrible thing. And to raise these children in that and to send them to these camps. They have a camp called Azovets, which is like an Azov run camp by the Azov battalion, which, you know, they're the real neo-Nazi Azov battalion guys. And they run Azovets, which is a camp for little kids to, you know, just become part of Azov. And then they want to bring them up so they already know how to fight. And some of those kids, you know, they started this back in, you know, years ago. By 2014, it was going on. It was really going on even before that. But after 2014 is really when they got it going in earnest. And these kids have grown up, and some of them are adults now that have been raised this way. And we're seeing that, I think, with just massive brainwashing in Ukraine.
Another woman